let's talk about the economy. Inflation is slumping again for the fourth consecutive month from 45% in March to 41.2% in April 2023. Joining us now to talk about that is the head, or if we should say, of course, the man with all of the figures, Isaac Ofieche, who has the data and analytics on all of this. But first, let's listen to, of course, what it is that the Statistical Service has to say about these new figures. I will get that for you shortly. But Isaac, quite a great figure we're seeing there, 41.2%. What will be the implication largely?
Well, so this is good for us because I'm just looking at the curve. And, you know, Mr. John Foster Ajaho, who is a head of price statistics at the Ghana Statistical Service, will be joining us. So he will give us more insight. But I'm looking at the curve and it looks pretty good because there's a time that we've actually plateaued and we are coming down. There's the fourth consecutive time that we are seeing inflation actually slumping. It started decreasing when we peaked in December with 54.1%. It has now, you know, declined to 41.2%. Very, very significant because we're talking about rate of inflation.
Yeah.
You know? So from 54.1 to 41.2 is so significant that we have to talk about it. And then if you look at the month on month for this year, for instance, there's something worrying that I see on the graph where although inflation has actually decreased from 45 to now 41, month-on-month basis, we've actually left the deflation zone where last month, the March inflation, if you look at between February and March, the month-on-month inflation was a negative 1.2%. But if you look at the graph right now, from between March and April, it has actually moved from the negative 1.2 now to 2.4. It means that we've seen year-on-year inflation declining, but on month, you know, inflation is
okay,
rising.
But then what was shocking was that if you pay attention, some products have not changed in terms of their inflationary figures. What's accounting for that, and what are some of these products?
Well, so inflation is actually like calculating the change in price of a basket of goods. So someone will say, oh, inflation is decreasing, well, we are having price levels fall, but I'm actually not feeling it. It depends on the items you have in your basket. You get it? So although the headline figure is 41.2%, you may have, you know, items recording inflation rate above the headline figure, which is the 41.2%. But what we know is accounting for this is that, you know, if you look at the graph, for instance, and the charts given by the Ghana Statistical Service, most of the top 20 items that we are looking at are all local inflation. So this 41.2% inflation we are seeing is locally driven. It's not really of external. When we were moving from the 13s to the 50s, it was predominantly external factors where we actually saw the indirect influence of, you know, the exchange rate depreciation of the CD, and then also some other factors like the rise in fuel prices. But now you see crude price have dropped significantly, and then we've also seen right from the beginning of the year, fuel prices have actually dropped more than 20% or 30% significant. Even transport fares have actually also decreased by some sort of significant percentage. And the CD is pretty performing well, where, you know, Fitch is even predicting that we may end the year but with $1 to 12 CD. That would be good. So if you look at all those factors, they're actually the ones indirectly influencing the 41%.
Good indicators for us. Let's put this before Patrick Isuming, who's an economist joining us via Zoom right now. Thank you for your time here on The Pulse. 41.2%. For you, good news, or there's more to it?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to viewers. Thanks for having me. I think, well, it's good that we have a clear direction that the inflation rate is coming down. This is the fourth straight month that we've seen the inflation rate coming down. So I think it's good from that score. But we have to understand that 41% is still high. Even to come down quite a bit from where we were at the start of the year. 41% is And when you see the breakdown, you also see some aspect of it is quite worrying. In particular, you see that food inflation is extremely high. It's way higher than the overall inflation rate. So while the broader picture paints, the broader number tells us that we are heading in the right direction, there's still a lot of work to be done.
And for food inflation, what impact will that have on individual economies, if we should put it that way?
So, you know, if you look at the economy as a whole, generally poor people spend a higher fraction of their incomes on food. And the way incomes have been in the last year or so, you see that it's likely that the share people have been devoting to food have been rising. So when food prices are rising at such faster pace, it means that it's really threatening people's livelihoods, especially the urban poor. For the rural, maybe many of them are net food producers, but for the urban poor who are net food buyers, the high rising food inflation is quite problematic.
And government is running some concurrent policies, which, for instance, we've heard the Vice President attribute the decline in inflation to, for instance, the gold for oil deal and others targeted at artificially cutting down on inflation. Is this the time to give credit to these policies?
I'm not sure that I will give any credit to gold for oil. I'm not sure that I will give go for when it comes to inflation. The true policy, that the monetary policy rate has gone up substantially with the view to try to fight the inflation. So we can see that has had an impact. The other thing is also related to that is the fact that the currency has been very stable. I mean, whether we can attribute the stability of the currency to the good for oil, for me, is very doubtful. I don't see anything that suggests that the stability in the currency.
We seem to have a very checkered connection to Dr.
But
Assuming.
Dr.
Assuming, if you can hear me, we're losing you intermittently. Could you take that point for us again? Okay, not a good time. But Isaac, the point he was raising about the stability in the currency and concurrent policies being run by government. For instance, the gold for oil deal, we've heard the Vice President express optimism about that policy and how it's likely to impact, for instance, inflation. Are we beginning to do the science around that?
Well, I think the government statistician was asked this same question, and then I would like to, paraphrase his answer. He said that some of these measures or policies we are talking about, i.e., the stability gain in the cedi's performance against major trading currencies and the fuel prices and also transport fares, they do not directly impact inflation, but indirectly they have some sort of influence. Because just look at it, if you are transporting goods from one point to the other and it is relatively cheaper, it means that you're also going to reduce your price. And one key determinant of inflation is the PPI, which is the producer price index. And producers produce with a certain cost. And so if the cedi stability, drop in fuel prices, and then also a decrease in transport fares, also helping them to cut down on cost of production. And it simply means that they are going to really, price of goods are going to drop and all that. And so the government said that, you are not supposed to directly see an impact. But it's good anyway, because if you look at the gold for oil deal, if the policy document that we actually have and what we've actually outlined is playing out pretty well, it means that, as a country, we need close to almost like $400 million every month to import crude refined crude into this country. So if you're able to reduce this, it's going to put less pressure on the cedi. The cedi will gain some sort of stability, and indirectly, it will help stabilize prices.
Let's try one more time and see if Dr. Assuming is back with us. Doc, we lost you earlier on the point you're raising about the stability of the cedi and concurrent programs being run by government.
Yes, I was trying to make the point that at this stage, I'm hesitant to attribute the current reduction in the inflation to the good for oil. It's difficult to see how that policy in and of itself would have done much to bring the inflation where it is. Because even it would have, if for that to happen, it would have to go through the currency. The currency has been stable, but it's difficult to see that it is directly linked to the good for oil, given the volumes that we are getting through the good for oil and other factors. So I will mostly attribute it to the central bank's monetary policy that has, really raised the policy rate and reduced the demand for credit. So mostly that is the one that I will attribute this inflation, this stability in inflation to.
Okay, let's look at the way forward and how we can improve the figures. 41, you say, is on the high side. Any more policy options for government to consider?
So I think that, for me, I'll tend to look at the disaggregated number and maybe pay a little bit more attention to the food production, because we see that it is the food inflation that has remained highly elevated. The continuous stability of the currency will help. We see that if you look at domestic versus imported inflation, the imported inflation is still high. So the continuous stability of the cedi will help. But ultimately, if we pay more attention to boosting production, especially food production, the agri sector, we are likely to see the food inflation component come down, because at the moment, between food and non-food, that is the bigger driver of the inflation we are seeing.
Okay, so you claim that even if we have the overall figures declining and we're not able to do anything about food inflation, that would not mean much?
So I'm saying that having the overall inflation falling is good. But let's not just get sidetracked by the fact that the overall number is coming down. Because if you look at the disaggregated number, there are some key items that are seeing very high inflation. You look at cereals and cereal products. It has a very high weight in the CPI basket, and the inflation rate for that is very high. You look at even tubers, vegetables, roots, you also see these are staples for Ghanaians. So it's good that the overall number is coming down, but you have to understand, first of all, the number is still very high. And secondly, when you do the disaggregated number, you see that there are some key products whose prices are still very high that we need to, or whose prices are still rising very fast that we need to pay attention to.
Isaac will help us with some of the peculiar cases and some of these items that Doc is talking about.
So the overall looks really good, but they say the devil is always in the details. So I'm sure a lot of people will resonate with this. So if you look at the inflation for bread, it's still very high, 77.9%. Inflation for sanitary pad is 75.9%. Inflation for women underwear is 73.4%.
Really?
Exactly. 73.7%. And I'm sure, our director and go will resonate. It's still very expensive. Look at smoked herrings. Amane is around 72.6%.
Okay.
And last one, let me look at baby food.
Yeah.
Baby food is very high. Inflation is still around 70%. So just like Doc said, the overall figure may look very good, 41.2%, but that's just an average.
Yeah.
If you go into the disaggregation, you realize that some of the items really have high inflation that we need to really
I'm just wondering what's essential about the other item you are referring to. But, Doc, that's the reality on the ground. So in terms of taking personal choices, even as we look at our own pockets, what do we need to consider as individuals buying within these times?
So we have to, many households have to reconsider the choices they make within product classes. So you see, the inflation we are seeing is a consequence of how the economy is doing. So we are import dependent, and also, we have domestic production challenges, and the currency is not doing well. So what it means is that as an individual, as a household, if you look at, say, food or cereal, take food cereal for example, you will see that even within the cereal category, some prices are rising faster than others. So it's time for you to consider making switches where possible, because, you know, we've also seen in the course of this month additional releases from the Ghana Statistical Service. That's showing that the work front, on the work front, on the labor front, you know, employment is not doing great. And then later on, I'm sure they're going to release the wages and the earning number. That will tell us that wages are also not going up. So I think it's time for households to be very frugal in terms of their choices, and maybe try to postpone some big ticket item expenditures where we can.
Okay then, Doc, we've taken a lot of your time, but it's worthwhile. Thank you for spending some time with us here on The Pulse. And